Okay, now we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the router. This particular router is mounted in a table. You can also use a router freehand, but most of the work that we do here in the shop is done from the router table. The router is mounted on the underside, and it's controlled in various ways from the top. It is not hardwired in. You would have to plug it in from an extension cord. The switch is on the front of the table. And the router is just a very high-speed rotary cutting tool. There are a number of bits that go into the collet on the router, and the profile that it cuts varies. It can be anywhere from a very simple cut to a very complex profile. And they're all cut with these bits. Now, to get the bit into the router, the first step is to take this plate off. It's done with this Y-shaped handle, and the cover comes off. Now, there's a flush adjustment here. You just drop the handle in, and now you can raise and lower the router motor. Now, it needs to be pretty close to all the way up to be able to get this in, because you have to use 2 wrenches. There's a nut on the bottom that is fixed onto the shaft of the router. And then there's a second nut on the collet that compresses the collet around the router shank. And you would simply put you just put the bit in. You would never go all the way to the bottom. You always want to be a little bit up, because it will help you get the bit out once you're finished. But you have to hold the router shaft with one of the wrenches, and you tighten the collet with the other. And now you would lower the router motor back down. You would replace the cover, and now you have a very small gap between the router bit and the tabletop. Now you would lower this until you get it in the correct position to make your cut. And then once you have the height adjusted, you take the wrench out, and you can set all of the tools aside. Now, when it actually comes time to make your cut, most often you don't take off all of the material for the finished cut in one pass. You would adjust the bit in such a way that you take off a portion of the material in several passes until you get up to the actual profile that you want. So you don't do it all at once. You would adjust it so that you take it off in more than one pass. Now, the direction that you feed from is also going to vary. I can't tell you that you would always go from right to left, because sometimes you don't. When you're using a router, you always want to engage the wood into the rotation of this bit. The bit rotates counterclockwise. So you want to engage the bit into the rotation. So if you were cutting from this side of that bit, then you would go from right to left, because you're going into the rotation. Now, if you were using the back side of this. If you were cutting on this side of the bit, then you have to go from left to right, because that, from the top, that would be going into the work. So I can't tell you right to left always, because sometimes you go left to right, and it depends on which side of the bit you're engaging. But the deciding factor is you always go into the rotation of the bit. Now, with that said, there's sometimes that you don't, but we won't get into that in this video. It's just enough said. You have to go into the rotation, and it's something that's very difficult to visualize from the video, but the first time that you actually use the router, it will become very obvious to you why you do it that way. If you don't go into the bit, if you're going with the bit, say if I was going to go from left to right on the bottom side, it would cut. But what it would do, it would try to move this board along faster, and it would be similar to a kickback on a table saw. And this piece of wood can get away from you very easily if you're feeding it with the rotation. But if you're feeding against the rotation, then it's much, much easier to maintain control of the cut. And there's really not a whole lot more that we would do from this table. It's just a very simple tool. It spins at a very high RPM. This one is currently set at about 18,000 RPMs. That is extremely fast. And it cuts very, very smooth. There's several other things that you can do. You can use the fence. You can set this fence at different positions, and then you can put the work against the fence and feed it through. And it has a nozzle in the back here where you can hook a shop vacuum to it for dust collection. But an awful lot of the cuts that you would make would be freehand, and this would be completely off the table. And again, the majority of your understanding of the router is going to come the first time that you actually start making cuts with a one. But it's very simple. When you finish, you would want to reverse the process, and you would remove the cover plate. You would use the handle to bring the bit all the way back up where you can get to both the nuts with the wrenches. Now, a lot of times that bit will not come out just by pulling on it, because it was held in by friction, and they're very close tolerances, and sometimes it's difficult to get the bit out. So if you take one of the wrenches, and you don't hit the bit, never hit the bit, but if you hit the nut down here, that can break it loose and it will come out. So it's perfectly acceptable to gently hit the nut, and that will relax the collet, and you can get the bit out. And once you have the bit out, then you would take the cover plate and put it back on. And then you put away the tools and you put away the bit. And then that would be it. You have made your cut and you put the machine back. We should never have a router sitting with a bit in the collet. It just makes the bit is now exposed, and if somebody comes through here and throws something on it, it can damage the bit, and we don't want to do that. So that's pretty much it on the router, and again, it'll be another tool, another day. And until then, you have a good day.